Welcome to another episode of The Communicative Leader. I'm your host, Dr. Leah O, and today we're thrilled to have Jimi Gibson with us to explore the magic of leadership communication and how it can inspire, influence, and captivate teams. Jimi, a lifelong magician turned into a marketing strategist, currently serves as a VP of Brand Communication at Thrive Agency, and this is one of the largest digital marketing agencies. With over 2 decades of experience, Jimi's leveraged his unique background in magic to develop a framework called the Magic Script. And my friends, this combines psychological principles with the art of performance to create really unforgettable communication experiences. In today's episode, we'll discuss how Jimi's journey from magician to marketing expert has shaped his approach to leadership communication. He's going to share actionable strategies from the Magic Script, including helping us to see how curiosity, empathy, and clarity can transform the way we engage and inspire those around us. If you're looking to enhance your communication skills and create a resonant impact within your organization, this episode is packed with practical wisdom and inspiration. So, without further ado, let's dive into the magic of leadership communication with Jimi Gibson. Hello and welcome to The Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah O'Million-Hodges. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On The Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. Jimi, we're thrilled to have you on The Communicative Leader. And before we dive into this really fun conversation, I'd love it if you could share a little bit of your journey. So how do you transition from your work as a magician to eventually where you are now, the VP of Brand Communication at Thrive Agency?
Yeah, well, thank you, Dr. O. I'm excited to be here and love chatting about this and love how you bring it back to leadership. It is sort of a twisty, turny path. It makes sense to me, but it might not make sense to everyone else. I got a magic kit for my 6th birthday. David Jackson, if he's out there. Thank you, David. And I just was fascinated with the puzzle aspect, hey, I know a secret that you don't know. And then people were asking me, well, show me a trick. And then I had to start to develop that performance approach. And every trick is basically you have something ordinary and you transform it to the extraordinary. It could be, hey, pick a card. And then now I've figured out what your card is, to, hey, there's an elephant on stage. And now the elephant disappears. But in the middle there's a little secret. And that's the cool part, is it typically involves some psychological principle that, because of the way we're programmed, it just goes right past us. Yeah. And that was the fun thing, to understand why someone could be fooled. And, I guess through high school, people were getting jobs at the grocery store or waiting tables. And I thought, well, I could probably make some money doing this. Yeah. And so I ended up putting myself out there and made a nice amount of money doing a variety of shows, festivals, birthday parties, that type of thing. And all of a sudden, there was a different structure to what I was doing, right? And so we talk about show business. And what is the balance between show and business? Well, I had to learn business principles. That's a lot different than learning tricks, right? And so I say that there's always show in business because there are things that we need to do related to marketing and branding, messaging, the consumer experience. But then there's all this behind the scenes stuff, the backstage stuff that nobody really sees, which is the strategy, the leadership, the systems. I'm kind of fast forwarding to where I am now. But back then, when I was doing shows in high school, I had to make sure that I presented myself well. I had to put forth a product that somebody would pay me for. I had to figure out what my pricing model was, all that kind of stuff. And so it just kind of kept going. Through that, I started to work for an ad agency and was doing promotional shows for one of their clients to the tune of about 50 shows a year. And so I was making pretty good money in high school and college, and I got very interested in the field of advertising. When I graduated, I started to work at an advertising agency. They were actually called ad agencies, so not dissimilar to what you saw in Mad Men,
Yep.
but now digital marketing agencies. But I always kept that magic bug alive. I actually would go into the agency at 6 a.m., work until 12, and then go to a theme park and do 6 shows at a theme park. And I was always able to either incorporate the principles of magic into what I was doing, because it's really about engaging, capturing attention, engaging an audience, leaving them something that's unforgettable. And so as a marketer, I realized I could pretty much take those skills and transfer them either 100% or mostly, because it doesn't matter if I'm producing a large scale illusion show or building a brand or building a team. There's a performance lens or a showmanship lens or a psychology lens that all of this has to come through. So that's sort of a quick flyby, but that's how I connected in my mind.
Yeah, I love all of that. I'm excited to hear you kind of expand on it.
Right.
Because you're right. There are a lot of times without actually making the true connection to the performance of magic tricks, when communication goes well, I often say like, oh, this is magic, because it feels like that. So as we continue this conversation, my next question is kind of right about that intersection. So that experience that you have as a magician, and how does that now kind of influence your leadership communication? And you've kind of talked about some of these already, but what are some of those insights that you're bringing that you realize that, every day in your marketing space, like, yeah, that's the same. It's just in a different packaging.
Right. Yeah. And there are a lot of marketing campaigns that use magic as a theme for exactly why you mentioned that. We're familiar with it. Everybody wants something to work like magic. If you think about traditional magic, the most cliche, I guess, is pulling a rabbit out of a hat, which I actually ended up doing at a theme park show because I was like, everybody talks about it. I've never seen anybody do it. So I'm going to do it. The problem with that was I thought I was buying a dwarf rabbit, and it ended up being this ginormous rabbit. So,
that's incredible.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story. But if you boil down every magic trick into categories of effects, and so the effect is what is the result or what is the actual magic that's happening, you can classify them into 13 fundamental effects. So let me give you some examples. Production, this is making something appear out of nowhere, right? So in business, it could be a product launch, a new service offering, a big reveal. So think Apple unveiling the first iPhone, right? Then we have vanish, making something disappear. So in business, this is solving a problem so well that the pain is gone. So think of Uber eliminating the need to call a cab, right? We have transformation, changing one thing into another. In business, this is like a rebrand, a new identity, a major evolution. So when I was a kid, my dad wore Old Spice, and it had this sort of persona of this old brand, but they reconfigured that now. It's like fresh and funny and tongue-in-cheek. And so they went through that transformation. Then we have restoration, so destroying something and making it whole again, right? So this applies to reputation management or turning around a struggling company, or prediction. A magician might predict something, put it in an envelope, and then have somebody, say something, and then that thing is in the envelope. But we do this all the time in business with analyzing data and trends and anticipating customers' needs. And so each of these effects and how you treat them can not only be from a marketing sense, but also in how you communicate from a leadership perspective with your team. And so if you're rolling out a new initiative, it just doesn't happen by magic, cliche, quote, quote. You have to get your team on board, right? And you have to be able to inspire them, bring them. So, the definition of a leader that I'm familiar with is someone who casts a vision and has people come along behind them and follow that vision, right? And so any of those 13 effects can also be used in a leadership perspective. And I think we're going to talk about clarity and making sure you communicate to teams efficiently and effectively. But, if we're in the marketplace, or if we're in an educational component, or if we're in a nonprofit, there's some activity that needs to be done. And I would say more often than not, they're going to fall in one of these 13 categories.
Mm-hmm.
And the leader needs to understand what is the effect, or what is the transformation, or what is the production or vanish, or whatever that is. And
Mm-hmm.
once you understand what that effect is, then it's very easy to structure the conversation around achieving that result.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and love that. And I think that's a perfect segue to your magic script.
Right.
And you talk about a lot of the work that you do now, it's rooted in this framework that you call the magic script. And I was hoping you could kind of walk us through these core principles and how you kind of use this to guide and drive engagement, alignment, and action.
Right. So I would say it's similar to a story structure. I'm a big fan of using story.
Mm-hmm.
People connect with story instead of data points, right?
Yep.
If you ask somebody, hey, what are you doing today? Oh my gosh, I went to the grocery store. I had to get a loaf of bread, and I got in the car, and all of a sudden
Mm-hmm.
there was a police car at the end of the road. I had to turn around and go this other route, and then I get to the store and they don't have the bread that I want. So I'm like, okay, now I got to read the labels. Which one is going to be the right one for me? And oh my gosh, the person in front of me, you've got 12 items. This is the 8 to 10 item line. Why do you have 12
Mhm.
items? And then I finally get home, right? So we're naturally going to fall into this story structure. So through the course of me working with performance coaches, I was fortunate enough to be included in a training program that a Broadway director who was in the original cast of Annie, he's directed
Mhm.
12 Broadway productions. We had to submit like a 3-minute piece of our act, and then he critiqued that act for 2.5
Mm.
hours. And so I started thinking about, what is it about how you connect with an audience and get to this point where,
Mhm.
I hate to spoil it for everybody on the call, but magic isn't real. But I'm going to create the illusion that
Mhm.
magic is real. And so, how does that happen? And so, I actually started to reverse engineer. And, Donald Miller has got a great program called Story Brand that's a little bit longer. I wanted something that was quick and
Mhm.
could be used across any thing, whether it be leadership, whether it be writing a keynote speech, giving a presentation, doing a pay-per-click ad online.
Mhm.
And so it boils down to these 3 areas. I'm going to actually give you an example of like a
Great.
consumer ad for a plumbing company.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you how a magic trick is structured. I'm going to talk about a leadership example. And so you'll see 3 examples there. I think hearing those examples, and if you're listening, you
Mhm.
might want to rewind this and kind of break this apart, and then we'll get into why it works and what is the science and the structure behind it. So, if I were doing a magic trick, I might pick up a deck of cards, and the assumption is that deck of cards is normal. We talked
Mhm.
about the normal or the ordinary moving to the extraordinary.
Mhm.
I may even borrow that deck of cards, and I'll say, "Hey, have you ever wondered if your choices are truly your own? Hey, let's put that to the test. Could you pick one of these cards?" That's the first part. The
Mhm.
second part is, all right, you've got a card that you're thinking about. Put that card back in the deck. I need you to hold out your hand and put your hand up against mine, because I want to feel the vibrations of what you're thinking about. Do you think it's possible that I would be able to pick up those vibrations from your hands just from what you're thinking about? Hmm. You chose the Queen of Hearts, didn't you? Now, you had total freedom to pick any card that you wanted, da 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 da. So that's the structure. There's
Mhm.
basically 3 parts to it. All right, let me give you another example, and then we'll break these down. This is for a plumbing company. A clogged drain always waits for the worst possible moment, right before guests arrive or when you're late for work. Now, what if I could get that fixed today for you with no surprise fees, 100% satisfaction guaranteed? Book now, and we'll clear your pipes before your coffee gets cold. All right,
Yep.
one more example. We work hard. This is actually a structure to reduce client churn. All right. So we work hard to earn a customer's trust, and nothing is more frustrating than seeing them walk away. Every cancellation is a customer who once believed in us, but something changed. What if we could predict cancellations before they happen? What if we knew exactly when and why customers were losing faith in us and we had a plan to fix it? Starting today, we're rolling out a proactive outreach strategy that will make every customer feel heard before they even think about leaving. Every touch point counts. Even if you have the power to turn potential churn into lifelong loyalty. Let's make this happen. Okay, so those are three completely different examples. The last one was a leadership example. The middle one was obviously for a plumbing company. We work with a lot of home service companies at Thrive Agency. And then the first one, obviously, I'm very familiar with, a magic trick. So what's going on? The first part is a point of connection, okay? And so when we talk about that point of connection, there's a brain chemistry, oxytocin. And so these are neurotransmitters that communicate with the rest of the body. And that oxytocin is that feel good, love, this person knows me, they're in my tribe. That's the feeling. And so you have to enter that conversation with some sort of rapport or connection with that person, or you're not able to move to the next step. So in the magic trick, I've got this deck of cards. I'm just having a conversation. If it's their deck of cards, there's some, camaraderie there. Everybody's seen a deck of cards, so it's very familiar. In the plumbing example, I'm putting myself in their shoes, right? So I'm saying, this is terrible. The plumbing situations always happen at the worst times. And so the person on the receiving end goes, oh yeah, of course. Yeah, that makes sense. Yep. I'm frustrated too. So what are we going to do about it? And then in the other example, if a company has goals and losing clients is going against those goals, then everybody is frustrated. And so I'm identifying with the team that we're all frustrated about this, right? So now we've opened that door to be able to activate some curiosity. Now, the curiosity actually triggers dopamine. We may have heard about dopamine addiction with social media. It's not really the addiction to social media. The dopamine requires closure. And so there's an expectation of reward, right? And so when you activate that curiosity, if you stop there, then everybody's sort of buzzing and in a flurry to like, oh, how are we going to resolve this? Yep. And so activating that curiosity in the magic example is put your hand up next to mine. Do you think it's possible for me to, read your thoughts through your hand? Well, obviously you're going to go, okay, I don't know. This is kind of wacky. Maybe so, maybe not. Where's this going to end up, right? In the plumbing example, what if I could come out there and fix it right away with 100% guarantee? You're like going, well, I've never heard of that before. How's that possible? Yeah. And then in the other example with churn, you're raising curiosity to say, what if we could predict cancellations before they happen? Okay, well, that kind of sounds like mind reading. Again, going back to those 13 effects. And you've got the team trying to figure out, how are we going to do this? We've been trying to figure this out. And so the last part is a release of serotonin, which is the relaxed, everything is good, the story's over, that type of thing. And that's the conversion or the end of it. And so in the magic trick, I've revealed the card. In the plumbing situation, I've asked them to book a appointment, book me. And in the last one, we're saying, this is a new program that we're rolling out. We're going to measure every touch point, come on board with me. And so that is the basic structure. And again, it can be for a business presentation. It can be for an ad. It can be for a magic trick. And as I started to reverse engineer what happens in a magic trick, I went, oh my gosh, this is exactly what can be used in engaging a team, structuring a marketing conversation, those types of things. So is that helpful?
That is so insightful, Jimmy. Yes. And thank you for the examples too. When you were going through them, I'm like, yep, magic, magic, magic. And even knowing the different elements, my brain was like, nope, magic. But it is helpful to see all of the science that allows us to move successfully from one stage to the next and leave people feeling satisfied.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wouldn't say it's shady or underhanded. You're just working within the bounds of how everybody lives and thinks, and their desire to have their problem solved, or their desire to be part of something, or their desire to be fooled at a magic show. So it gives you a leg up, and it allows you to be successful in whatever it is you want to do.
Yeah. So let's dive into the magic script a little bit more deeply
Okay.
now. So, with all of the individuals that you work with, your employees, maybe some clients, we know that there are unique challenges and opportunities that individuals are facing when it comes to communicating
Right.
in the workplace today. We've got all of these messaging, all these deadlines, sometimes mixed messages. What with your magic script, can you kind of pull out maybe some unique challenges that you kind of see often, but then maybe also some opportunities that we could lean into?
Sure. I think I can sum up the challenge in one word and the opportunity in one word.
Awesome.
But I'll give a little more context so
Yeah.
we've got something to talk about. I would say the biggest challenge right now is noise. People are bombarded with messages every day, and
Yeah.
most of them are forgettable. And I would say that's internal communication as well as marketing communication. I don't know, we talk about screens, right? And so we have the computer screen that we work on. We have a screen that we make calls on or look at or keep up with family or social media. There might be a tablet or another screen. We might be watching a fourth screen at night. And so all of this information is just flooding us, and multiple channels. I would say the biggest opportunity is clarity. Leaders who communicate with precision and purpose are going to be more successful, right? So you need to really think like a magician to cut through that noise. And you can't just talk, you have to create moments that move people. So let me give you some examples. In magic, if an audience doesn't understand what the point of the effect is, when it comes to that last stage, they're going to go, what? Like, I didn't even know what was going on, right? So if I vanish an elephant, but people in the back don't realize what was going on at the beginning, that moment falls flat, right? The same as in leadership. So if a team doesn't understand what's happening, they can't follow through. So think about some great illusions from the past. I just mentioned the vanishing elephant. It's obvious. Something big disappears, right? The floating lady, clear as day. Someone defies gravity. These are simple plots that are dressed in showmanship, communication, and it follows that three-phase structure like we talked about. Connection sets up the expectation, curiosity engages the imagination, and then conversion delivers a moment that sticks. And so the leadership trap is unclear messaging. So in an organization, many leaders make their messaging too complex, too vague, or too forgettable, all right? So they try to explain too much at once, assuming that just because they know what's going on and they have communicated it, that people are going to understand it. So let me give you some bad leadership messaging. We're implementing a new operations workflow to streamline efficiencies across verticals and optimize cross-departmental resource allocation. What? Nobody knows what that means. So let's rewind it to the magic script. Starting Monday, we're switching to a system that will cut your weekly reporting time in half. Here's how it works. Now that's clear. It's repeatable. And just like a great magic trick, it creates that moment of understanding. So I would give some suggestions on how leaders can implement this. What you would want to do is make it clear enough that you could repeat it. So if your team can't explain it to somebody else, then they don't get it, right? So we're all familiar with that telephone game that we played as kids. Everybody sits in a row, and by the time the message gets to the other end, it's like something completely different than where it started. I think that is probably a fun game for the very reason why it's excruciatingly painful in organizations and why we continue to talk about that. So, a fun exercise may be to have people repeat it back. Use connection, curiosity, conversion, engage, intrigue, direct the action. And again, think like a magician. Make the complex things feel simple and compelling. And so a great leader doesn't actually just announce what's happening. They script a moment that sticks. And so I would say clarity is missing in business. And you also have to understand personality profiles. I know a lot of businesses have various personality profiles. How you communicate may not be how somebody wants to receive communication. So it's
Mm-hmm.
often good to understand what is the makeup of your team, how much information does somebody need, would they prefer it in written form, do they want to watch a video, providing information
Mm-hmm.
in multiple forms that is appropriate for their learning style or their ability to absorb that information is also important. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so helpful. And I keep thinking about what you said earlier, in this metaphor of the leader being like, but wait, I made an elephant disappear.
yeah,
And the employees are saying, well, I didn't see that. I
right,
didn't see the elephant. So it doesn't, huh?
right,
And then we can see why there's so much confusion and frustration in
yeah,
organizations, because you're saying, we're not having that connection and a variety of other steps. But I just think that's such a perfect metaphor for what happens day in and day out.
yeah.
So let's lean. Oh, I'm sorry, Jimmy. Go ahead. Were you going
No,
to
no, no,
say
no,
something else?
no. I was just taking a breath.
Okay. Let's lean into curiosity. And this is, you've mentioned this a few times. And I'm just wondering if you could give us a little bit more about curiosity and how you use it to engage teams or people.
Yeah. So there's an interesting thing that happens when you're on stage and in the first part of learning a performance, you're just trying to get through that performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're not thinking about anything other than the mechanics of that. And then at some point, you become pretty well versed in whatever the mechanics are, and then your brain is allowed to shift over to performance style and you connect with the audience. First step in the magic script,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so as a leader, you should know your team. You should be fully capable of performing whatever it is because you've gotten to the point where you are. And the secret to bringing an audience to that point where they lean in. And so again, I'm picturing myself on stage and I'm structuring the way in which I deliver the trick so that there's enough curiosity where somebody's not leaning back, crossing their arms, checking their phone. They're actually leaning in, and we call that being on the edge of your seat, right? And so that's a performance term that actually came from people anticipating something very exciting that was happening in front of them, right? And so if we can take that same thought process into the boardroom, into the break room, into the
Yeah.
meeting room, wherever that is, instead of saying something like, we have a new process change, right? So what is that going to do? In somebody's brain, they're going to go, this is a lot more work. I already have enough work on my plate. How am I going to get a new process change in order, right? And so you have to think through, what are all these mental conversations people are having? You have to know what your audience is going to be feeling. And then we restructure that and we say, what if I told you that one small change could increase our lead flow by 20%? Well, that doesn't sound like a process change. That sounds like, wow, if our lead flow increases 20%, then we get more money. Perhaps I could get a raise. The company is going to be successful. We didn't get bonuses last year. Maybe we'll get bonuses. Like, then the whole mental conversation shifts, right? It's the same thing. You know, so I would say curiosity to engage teams has to be thoughtful and has to be focused on the person receiving that information. It activates the imagination, right? And once people are imagining the possibility, they're invested in the outcome.
I love that. And I think too, where you're also bringing in storytelling, but in a different way, where your audience then is part of crafting that story, which is really powerful.
Oh, yeah.
So we've looked at curiosity. Another element that you've kind of talked about, and I know that you firmly believe in, is empathy. So I was hoping you could talk to us about how, your personal focus on empathy and how you've seen it impact, your experience in the workplace, especially in terms of trust building and kind of team dynamics.
Sure. Well, I know I keep going back to magic examples because that's my lens. So we'll start there and then we'll branch out.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
To me, my definition of empathy is basically the old phrase, if you could walk a mile in my shoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned this lesson the hard way. I had my own show that was just me, and then I was hired to do a theme park show with a cast of 20 and all these giant illusions. We made a Corvette appear. We made the entire cast vanish, that type of thing. I'm not musically inclined. There were all sorts of music cues that I had to figure out how to do these cues in my head. There were lighting cues, and I thought I was doing a great job. But one night, so I did the show 5 days a week, and then there was an understudy who subbed in for me just in case I got sick or whatever. And so I went and sat in the audience, and everything looked completely different. Like there was a lighting cue that I was supposed to move my hand down. But what I didn't realize was when I moved my hand down, there was a piece of scenery that was flying onto the stage. The music was choreographed to what was going on across the stage. And the way the audience reacted was completely different than what I saw from my vantage point of the stage. Right. And so I think sometimes as leaders, we are biased in how we see things from our perspective. And you're not gonna truly understand until you sit in the audience's seat and realize exactly what's going on. And so there was a show, I don't know if you're still on the air, called Undercover Boss. And so the big reveal moment at the end was the fact that the leaders didn't often know or see what their teams were going through. Right. And so if you want to be a great communicator and a great leader, you need to get in your audience's seat, walk in their shoes, and then you're going to be able to connect. And so I came from a creative background. I was a creative director before I got into operations and management. And I never wanted to ask somebody on my team to do something that I had not already done myself. And if I hadn't already done that myself, I needed somebody to walk me through the steps involved in that. Because if we were doing quotes or if we were doing a large project and there was project management involved, I may be making assumptions about how long something should take. And then I'm going to get angry when those things don't happen on the schedule or the time frame that I'm expecting them to happen. But there's probably some nuance to what is involved in that I'm completely blind to. And so everybody, I don't think I've met anybody that I have sat and asked, could you walk me through your process, that wasn't excited to be proud of what they do and the craftsmanship that they bring to their work. And the fact that somebody actually cared about it. And then that was brought into a conversation about how we proceed in the business. So I would say that's my view of the situation.
Yeah. And that's so, when you were talking earlier, one of our earlier questions about meeting your audience, even thinking about the communication that they prefer. I had a manager one time, like almost yelling at a colleague saying, accept my tough love as it's meant to be. And it was so hard not to laugh because you knew in the situation you couldn't laugh, but you're like, I feel like I'm on a bad sitcom right now.
Yeah.
So you are,
I think we've all seen things like that. Yeah.
Yes. And certainly that also ties in with, all of this wisdom you're sharing with us about empathy and thinking about being in that receiving end of that.
Yeah. We go back to the 7 habits of highly effective people: seek first to understand before being understood. Right. And so that takes some scars to be able to admit that you don't know everything, right? And so you got to be humble, and you got to be a servant leader, and you got to invest in your team that way.
Yep. It's a commitment and a whole lot of practice.
Oh yeah.
Well, let's look at clarity now. And I know this is another element, and we talked about this as being, one of the leader's strongest tools. So we know that this is a foundational element in the magic script. And I was hoping you could give us a little bit more about this, this particular ingredient. I mean, it's pretty clear why we need it. And maybe you could tell us what happens when that clarity is missing.
Yeah. That was funny. You said it's pretty clear why we need it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would say lack of clarity is the reason most initiatives fail. If your team doesn't understand what to do, they're going to guess, and more often than not, they're probably going to get it wrong. So I always say, if you can't explain your message in one sentence to a 10-year-old, it's too complicated.
I like that.
And if something is too complicated, people are not going to act on it. So again, it applies at every level of leadership. If a CEO is rolling out a new company vision, maybe a manager is explaining why their quarterly goals have changed or increased. A frontline employee is handling a customer issue. Clarity removes hesitation. So when things are clear, you don't want any friction. And so the lack of clarity causes friction because people don't know how to proceed. And they haven't been perhaps given the autonomy to proceed. So you want to remove hesitation. It eliminates second guessing. It makes action easy. And so, again, we'll go back to the magic script. Every great illusion follows a clean, simple plot, something the audience can grasp. Sawing a woman in half, she's split, then restored. There's a trick called the cups and balls. The ball vanishes, it reappears under another cup. The trick works because the audience knows what's supposed to happen. They can follow the effect from start to finish. The same, so we should do the same for leadership communication. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We talked about overcomplication, can't talk, kills the message. So again, confusing leadership messaging. We need to leverage synergy between departments to cultivate culture of cross-functional efficiency. Now, if you sat there and stared at that, you might be able to figure it out, but people have heard buzzword bingo and everybody wants to load it up to make themselves seem smart and, all that kind of stuff. But what's actually happening is the audience is going, oh my gosh, this is baloney. Why do we have to listen to this? And you're also not thinking about how that message is landing. So here's that same message in a much clearer approach. Each department will have one point person for cross-team requests. That way we eliminate the back and forth and we get approvals faster. It's clear, it's actionable, people can repeat it. If somebody left the meeting, what was the point of that meeting? Oh, well, Joe's going to be the single point of contact and everything flows through him, right?
Yep. Cool.
So, yep, that's it. Everybody goes, yes, it's repeatable. So there's 3 rules that you can test if your message is clear. You can say it out loud. If you stumble over your words, it's too complicated. So you heard me stumble over the first part, right? And so I couldn't even say it myself. Use next step language. So always answer, so what do I do now? Right? And so in this case, what do I do now? If I have a cross-department communication, it goes through Joe, right? And then test it. Ask a team member to explain it back to you in their own words. If they can't, it wasn't clear enough. Now, when a message is clear, people trust it, right? They feel safe taking the action. It removes that pause or that hesitation. So again, I've got to get in touch with this other department. What do I do? Do I email them? Do I pick up the phone? Do I use our Slack channel? Like, what is it, right? And so that causes delays. And so it's just basically a bridge between a vision of how something needs to be and then the execution of it.
I like that. I'm very visual, and I like that idea of that bridge between those two. Yeah, because you're right. So often, we don't get there.
Yes, the bridge is out.
Yeah. That's so helpful. And so let's shift gears a little bit. So, all of this, incredible work that you're doing and thinking about messaging and connecting. And I think a way that you apply that over and over is in all these teams that you've led. And I know that some of them have been really large with over 120 people. So that is not an easy feat. And considering these experiences, I was hoping you could share some of your key insights or kind of takeaways about how to communicate effectively across all of these different levels, and especially if you have really vast teams like the ones you have experience with.
Sure. We're going to have some repeat folks that come in, and so clarity is going to be part of that. I think leading big teams, I would say less and mean more. We actually went through a restructuring of the whole organization a few years ago that I was championing. We have about 200 employees and we serve about 900 clients. And So we saw some issues with our teams not feeling like they could collaborate in the way that they wanted. When a project came through, they might be working with different team members on each project. The clients were feeling like there was no more personal connection with the people that were working on their projects. The teams were more disconnected, not only to the client, but other team members and part of the company. And so we actually made the decision to move to a matrix organizational structure. And we divided the company into 4 smaller teams. So basically, we created 4 boutique agencies within the larger agency. Now, the best time to do that is when you start a company, not 19 years after you've been in business, right? And so you can imagine and nobody likes change but a wet baby. So everybody is like, what? Are you crazy? And so we decided that we would have a test team to work out all the problems. And we would not even give them a fourth of the clients, but a smaller, and we wanted to handhold everything through the process. And then we knew things were going to break. And we admitted that from an executive standpoint. We're like, look, this is something new. We need everybody's help. And so we actually thought about the layers involved. And so we have department functional leaders. We have team leads within that. We have the frontline employees. We have various people related to IT and systems. We have obviously upper management. And so instead of putting everybody through the pain of a 50-slide PowerPoint deck, we're just going to say collaboration is going to get easier, right? And then we show them exactly what that means and give people a chance to ask questions and offer feedback. So I remember, gosh, it was about 2 weeks. Me and some other folks went to every department and we did basically a town hall meeting. And we talked about how long we'd been thinking about this internally, what this meant for profitability, what this meant for them on a daily basis. And again, using empathy, we put ourselves in the seat and we said, look, when you get to work, you don't know who you're working with every day. What if you could have a collaboration? And, we're mostly a remote company, and so we don't get to sit around and, partner up in an office. People were feeling very disconnected from their work. And so we painted that picture of everybody spread out being silos and sitting on their own island to a more group focused mentality, how they were going to be able to collaborate together, the camaraderie that would happen. We took that test group and then we had them do a presentation that told the rest of the company, this is what I've experienced. I don't know why we didn't do this sooner. Here's what you're going to get. Yes, it's going to be difficult. Trust the process. We've made X, Y, Z and these changes through the process, and really ask the people who were part of that test group to be the evangelist and the folks that were spreading the good word about how this was going to work. We actually had a time frame that we beat by a month because everybody was so excited to get to the point of the future payoff of what this meant for the company. So,
yeah, that is really incredible. One, finishing ahead of schedule in a large scale change is virtually unheard of. And I like too, another thing I wrote down was that very explicit, like there are going to be some bumps and bruises. We expect this. Things will probably get dropped, but we're doing it in as small, as controlled fashion as we can. And we're here to triage. So I think so often we gloss over we think that we're going to help our people by glossing over those challenges and likely obstacles. And it's the exact opposite. We're just unequipping them ahead of time.
Right. And so you go from a point of fear that like, if something goes wrong, there's going to be egg on my face to go, there's going to be a lot of egg on everybody's faces. But here are the priority. We don't want to lose any team members. We don't want to lose any clients. Here are the points of feedback that we're expecting you to be part of. The team wants to know, did you just think this up yesterday or do you actually have a plan? How does this plan affect me? How do I give feedback if I want to give feedback? And so that diffuses the resistance and then brings momentum into the equation.
Yeah, and I love too. I also want to raise up having those who went through that test group first to create the presentation at that point and share the experiences. So especially in organizations, we get used to hearing from the same few leaders over and over.
Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of like mom and dad. There's a point where you need to hear it from someone else for it to stick and to make sense. And
Of course.
and I think that's just such a great way to bring in other opinion leaders, empower your people. And then you're also saying, hey, here's some other lines of communication, some connections that you might not have had before. You have a face with the name. It's a lot easier to reach out then.
Absolutely. And, companies and organizations, they hire smart people. Let them be smart.
Yep. Yep.
Let them help
Oh,
you.
I love that. Exactly. And so let's lean more into vision now. And this is something in your previous example, certainly we see that in play. And I know that you've spent time in the creative side and the operation side. And some of your work, you've been aligning directors and other leaders to this shared vision.
Right.
So could you help us see, maybe walk us through a time you've done that, or if it's that previous one, kind of help us to understand why that shared vision is essential for a leadership team.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to the magic script again, right? And so there has to be that connection point, the curiosity point, and then this conversion or action associated with it. And when you're trying to bring somebody on board, and again, a lot of organizations have an executive team or a leadership team, and they meet about something, and they've been working on this for months, right? And then they're going to introduce it to the rest of the organization. They don't have all the background of all of those conversations. They don't perhaps know whether it's revenue based, whether there's a competitor who's come into the market, whether your intended customer or audience that you work with, if it's a nonprofit, if something has changed in the environment, has there been a new regulation that has come into play that is affecting the way in which we're able to do what we used to do? We're not going to be able to do it in that way. And so there's a whole lot of background stuff. And so bringing people into that conversation appropriately and not having closed door conversations is also important, because you also want to check that what you are proposing actually will work. It's a good idea. You're going to get buy-in. And so including people at all levels of the organization and being strategic about how you share the information, and you say, hey, we're thinking about this initiative. We think there may be a problem with this. Can you shoot holes in that for me? Oh, wow. Okay. I've never been asked to do that
You
before.
did. Yep.
Tell me more about that. And so all of a sudden, you have these pockets of people around the organization who are like, I just got invited to, talk about this, or somebody wanted my opinion about that. So that is the part of connection. You also need to know your team and the situation intimately. And then you have to throw that curiosity into the mix. And so when you're having these conversations, even with the executive team or the leadership team, and then you're bringing these other folks in, throw that curiosity in the component. Hey, we've always done this particular procedure this way. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could just cut that out, vanish, right? So that's one of the 13 effects. Well, I don't know. We've always done it that way. I know, but what if we didn't do it that way? Wow, I have to think about that. Well, it sure would speed up this other process that is getting bogged down because of that. And so now you've activated their imagination.
Yeah.
And then we bring it to the conversion. Well, actually, we're thinking about rolling out this process, and we're going to put this test team in place. So I consider that like a dress rehearsal for a show. So any show that you go to, they have what they call a press night, or they call an IDS. So that's a invitation dress rehearsal. And so an invitation dress rehearsal does a couple of things. It's usually a week before the actual opening, and you invite family and friends, and you do the show as if it was a public audience. And what the director is listening for is, did people laugh at the right point? Did they clap at the right point? And so you're also doing that in an organization, and you're saying, well, that didn't land the way we wanted. Have you ever heard that before? Of course you have.
Yep.
And so we have to structure how we present. I knew a gentleman who was a partner at Apple, a vendor that was partnering with Apple on something, and he was actually invited to one of their launch days. And when you hear about the behind the scenes that goes into a launch day, it's incredible. It is choreographed. You have to submit what you're going to say. There are people that coach you on stage as to how you're going to do that. I gave a TEDx talk, and there was a similar approach because TEDx is a brand, and they want to make sure that every speech relates to that brand. Well, I would say, you mentioned change management before. There is a process and a good way to do change management and a bad way to do change management. And so it's not going to hurt for you to perhaps hire a consultant if it's a huge initiative to poll the team or understand the impact. And so the other thing that we talk a lot about at Thrive is unintended consequences. So if we do this, we haven't thought through prediction, mind reading, what the future may hold if we make this change. And again, I brought up the fact that we all see the world through our own lens. You probably have some people in a department who are very good at looking into the future. And you should probably include them in that conversation. And so this is kind of a rambly version of answering your question. And certainly you should never make decisions by committee, because it usually gets watered down, and there has to be somebody that's championing the project. And, they're the ones in charge of evaluating all of the input that is being given. But I guess my success as a leader has come from asking a bunch of questions, immersing myself in the project or process, and then being able to discern what to use and what not to use. And if we don't use something, make sure you follow up with that person and say, what, your input was great, but what we didn't know at that particular time was this other thing that we didn't understand, but you actually helped us open up a different conversation. So thank you for your input, So I would say that's, it's pretty much what business is about. We all have to change on a daily, weekly, quarterly, yearly basis, and managing that is tough.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that idea of even going back to those who, it's probably more important, of their suggestions you didn't use. Because we offer those once or twice. If we don't hear anything, then all of a sudden we're thinking twice about that. We're probably going to hang on to them. And that debrief, even just that quick email saying, thanks so much, I wanted to let you know, can really mean a lot and encourage them to continue to contribute.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So, Jimmy, you kind of talked about this already in that last response about including people of all levels. And as a organizational scholar, I know that so often all of these decisions are made at the top and they funnel down. But it's interesting because the higher someone gets in their leadership, typically the further they are away from these, that daily work of interacting with those stakeholders or clients, customers. So I'm wondering, in your experience, how do we empower these frontline employees to take ownership of their role so they feel like empowered to problem solve or offer different suggestions or solutions?
Yeah. So just from a tactical aspect, we involve the team in creating the standard operating procedures, or SOPs. And so they get a say in how the work gets done. And we're always trying to beat the performance of an operating procedure. Obviously, we're in marketing, so it has to do with ad performance or revenue or ranking for keywords, those types of things. The other thing that I think a lot of businesses overlook is people want to know that they matter, right? And so we've implemented Thank a Thriver Thursday. And so every Thursday, you're supposed to thank. Now, again, it's voluntary, but it's caught on as a culture thing. where a team member gets public recognition for their contribution. And so once you see contributions at all levels, then you have a better picture as to what somebody is actually doing across the organization to contribute to the whole. And who doesn't like to be thanked? I know that usually every time I give one out, somebody says, "You made my day." And so they're just being recognized. The other thing that we do is we're involved in some charities. We give a microloan through Kiva for every new account that comes on board, and we ask our team to participate in who gets chosen for that microloan. And so now these things are not related to productivity. They're not related to your question about autonomy to make decisions, but they are related to being valued and feeling connected to the organization. We also discourage overtime, which is kind of unheard of in the digital marketing space. But we believe if you have a happy home life and you take time off to be with friends and family, that you're going to come back to work more engaged, more inspired. The other thing that we do is we have regular meetings where we have an open forum for feedback. We also have trackable results where everybody sees what the expectation is for everybody else on the team, and they're public. And so people are aware of what the goals are, and it's not easy to hide. And so we want that to really allow us to attract and retain talent that's okay with that. So I think those types of things. And then we also foster a management style of, instead of telling people what to do, asking, what would you do in this situation? What is your recommendation? Instead of dictating what should be done, because we've given them guardrails, right? We're not just saying do anything you want. We have an SOP. We have client goals that we have documented. And so within those guardrails and within those bounds, how are you going to navigate what you've been asked to do? And so that is part of, and then we have a quarterly review process that invites that type of feedback from the performer, and then allows us to compliment the team member on what they're doing and how they're doing. And, we don't want people to sit silent and just say, tell me what to do. The minute you say, tell me what to do, you've lost your value. Right?
Yep. I love that, because it's really interwoven into the fabric of the culture at Thrive Agency, rather than just, let's do this one thing. They're getting a little antsy. How do we appease this? Which is unfortunately what many, many organizations do. So last two questions for you, Jimmy. They're not interdependent, they're connected.
Okay.
And this is the way that we end all of our episodes of The Communicative Leader. But the first one is kind of advice, challenge, or a tip for our titled leaders out there. And then the second one, same thing. It can be an advice, challenge, or tip for employees across all ranks and all industries.
Sure. Great questions. So for titled leaders, your title doesn't make you a leader, your ability to influence does. And so I would say, ask yourself these three questions. Would my team still follow me if I had no title? Do they trust my judgment or just fear my position? And do I inspire them or just instruct them? And so if your influence disappears when your title does, you haven't built leadership, you've built compliance.
Yep. Is spoken just beautifully. I love it. Okay. I'm like frantically writing notes.
And then for employees, a lot of employees think that culture is something the company is supposed to create or bring to them, but a great culture isn't given, it's built by the people in it. So if you want a more collaborative team, start collaborating. If you want recognition, start recognizing others. If you want a positive workplace, bring positive energy. So every employee at every level contributes to the company culture. So don't wait for it to appear. Be the culture that you want to see.
Yep, I love and I really love anything that gives people agency. Because there's
Yep,
so many times we feel like there is so much we can't control, but you're recognizing that, again, if we want recognition, it can be as easy as calling out and complimenting those around us.
sure.
Excellent. Well, Jimmy, thank you for sharing your time, your expertise. This has been an absolute blast. I've really, really enjoyed learning from you and learning more about you as well. So thank you for joining us on The Communicative Leader.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. O. It was a pleasure. Great way to spend an afternoon.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on The Communicative Leader.